The ego is evil and it has to be annihilated. That's the vibe that you'll get from a lot of the spiritual community nowadays regarding the ego. I'm David Pink, and I am a grandson of a bioenergetic healer. And today, we're going to take a deeper dive into the true nature of the ego. So I know I've spoken about the ego before by reciting the great Eckhart Tolle and his amazing book, The Power of Now. But today I wanted to go a little bit deeper because the information, the knowledge, the wisdom in this book is so profound. Let's jump into it. So according to Eckhart and many other masters, the ego is the source of all of our suffering. So Eckhart makes a distinction and says that pain is real, like physical pain, mental and emotional pain, it's real. But suffering is created by the narrative of the ego. For example, you stub your toe, hurts like a bitch, right? That's pain. But suffering is when the ego creates a narrative out of it. Oh my God, it hurts so much. I'm so clumsy. I never watch where I'm going. What's wrong with me? So suffering essentially is purely psychological. There can be mental pain and emotional pain. For example, when we lose somebody close to us, we experience pain because you had an energetic, emotional tie with this person or an animal even, and now it's been ripped away from you. And as I mentioned before in my previous videos regarding the ego, is that most of us are not aware that this is an inner psychic mechanism that causes us to think in certain negative ways. A lot of us just experience this inner mechanism as part of who we are. Like we say, oh, it's just how I am. It's just the way that I am, right? Wrong, according to Eckhart Tolle and many others. If we really do some introspection and take a look at our psyche and ask the question, why do we, myself included, create suffering for ourselves by the way that we think, by the way that we interpret situations, circumstances, things that happen, people? If we had the choice, wouldn't we all just choose to be free from negativity completely? So then what gives? The answer is, that's what the ego is, essentially. It's a part of our psyche that creates negativity by judging, overanalyzing, worrying, anxiety, self-pity, thoughts of lack, of not having enough, or not doing enough, or not being enough. Essentially, fear. The ego is fear-based, and its fear comes from the fear of not being accepted, not being loved. The feeling that we have inside of ourselves of being a separate self, that's the lifeline of the ego. In reality, there is no such thing as a separate self. It's just a mental, psychological construct. Think about it. Everything that you are, that I am, that we are, is because everything else is, right? This is what the Buddhists call interdependence, that all things exist interdependently, and all things come from one source. So how in the world can there be a separate self? So essentially, the ego is an optical illusion for our consciousness. This is why Einstein said that life is an illusion, but a very persistent one. It creates the illusion of the separate self. And when we experience ourselves as a separate self, which 99.9% of humanity does, you get the world that we have. Because you can only get a world filled with division and conflict when you have a bunch of separate selves walking around on the planet. So let's break this down, because the only way that we can truly go beyond something is to fully understand it. It's like you can't go on to calculus if you don't know trigonometry. So in the same way, we cannot go from ego to heart unless we first fully understand the ego and its mechanics. Going beyond the ego and becoming aware of heart-based consciousness is the only way forward for our species. If we want to survive, not only survive, if we want to evolve, if we want to go on to bigger and better things and not continue this endless loop that's been going on for thousands of years, of war and famine and genocide and conquering, dominating. It just goes over and over. Then the conqueror becomes the conquered. Then the conquered becomes the conqueror. And we're going in circles for thousands of years. We're not going to get anywhere unless we transcend this egoic state of consciousness, because this cycle stems from the egoic state of consciousness. Eventually, we want to evolve and come to a point where we can live cohesively with each other on this earth and even beyond this earth. We can join forces and help each other to grow and to understand, accelerate in our knowledge and understanding of the universe and of the laws of physics and metaphysics, and eventually learn the deeper secrets of creation and become an interplanetary and eventually an interstellar species. I mean, it's not coincidental that these kinds of things are in our movies and stuff, because this is what's in the collective subconscious. This is what we all want subconsciously. And that's only possible, that's not possible through ego-based consciousness, where it's like, every man for themselves, or every nation for themselves, every tribe for themselves, every religion for themselves. It's impossible. You just get a divided civilization. And a divided civilization is destined to fall, and which it has. We've just been falling and falling and falling. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've made a lot of progress in like medicine and technology and all that stuff for sure, but where's the progress spiritually? Can we say that we are more psycho-spiritually evolved than we were 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago? No, not really. And so I don't know why, but me personally, I have a very big inclination to want to ascend to that level of consciousness and experiencing oneness with all life and all creation. And because of this inclination and desire that I have, that I'm sure many of you have, I have delved into these books, into these works, into these texts, into these teachings of these masters, of these teachers who have gotten into that state. Because when you want to get somewhere, it's helpful to have a guide or several guides. So the ego, from my understanding, is multifaceted. It has layers to it. As children, as babies, right? We're born clean, clear. You ever seen a baby? They just look at everything with pure perception. They have no judgments about you. And where there is no judgments, there's just love. That's why when you look into a baby's eyes, you get that feeling inside, right, of love. You don't even know the baby. It could just be a random baby that you just see out in the street. But if you make eye contact with it, you get that feeling of love. There's no judgment in those eyes. It's just pure perception. And that pure perception, that's pure consciousness. That's the soul looking through the eyes of the baby. As a human being, right? Our brain is the prism through which consciousness filters through and experiences reality. When we are children, we are not making anything of the world yet. But what happens is we get influenced by those around us, especially the grown-ups. Unfortunately, what we're taught is not beneficial to our psyche and to our spiritual development. In fact, it's the opposite of beneficial. It's destructive. right? What are we taught when we're kids? That we have to be the best. We have to be better than the other kids. We create caste systems in our schools, honor roll, AP, remedial classes. I'm laughing because took a couple of them back in the day. And it's so ridiculous. It creates division from day one. We have this divisive psychological structure built into us. We also have religious segregation and structure that we're taught. Then unconsciously we pick up all these things from our parents and from society. We learn to think certain ways about people who are poor, about people who are middle class, about people who are wealthy, and all you get my point, right? All these things that we're learning, essentially what it's doing is it's creating so many categories, so many different ways to see people and to judge them. And essentially, it creates a completely distorted perception of life. Consciousness itself is pure. It's unobstructed. It has no judgment. It has nothing. It's just pure awareness, beingness, right? And the soul is a node of consciousness. There's one consciousness in existence. We can call it God. You can call it by anything you wish. This is something that I learned from reading Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. Beautiful, profound text. I highly recommend everyone watching this video or listening to this to read that book trilogy. Actually, it's 4 books. The newest one came out in 2016. The first 3, I believe, were all in the 90s. Anyway, this one consciousness individuates itself through many different nodes to experience itself through many different forms. And one of those forms is a human being. And so every single form has a brain or a nervous system, some sort of system that allows consciousness to experience itself through, whether it's a plant or an animal or a human or whatever else is out there. And if the human brain, as it's developing, grows up, taking on all of these different impressions, it's going to mold itself and form in a way in which it functions the way that it functions in 99.9% of us. And unfortunately, that way is the way of egoic consciousness. However, the potential is still there of rising above the ego, of coming into contact with our true essential nature, which is the soul, is still there. And that potential is what separates us from the animals. In an animal, the consciousness is there, but it's completely being run by instincts. In a human being, the potential is there for consciousness to become aware of itself. In other words, the potential for our godly nature to become aware of itself is there because of how sophisticated the human brain and nervous system is. And that realization, that experience, that coming to know your true self is essentially what we all long for and actually want, whether we realize it or not. And that's why so many spiritual masters have been so revered and followed through the centuries, because these masters have awakened in us that desire that's always there behind layers and layers of desires and projections that come from the ego. Things like success, material success, status, power, recognition, legacy, fame. And what's worst of all is that we are taught to go after these things by stepping on the heads of others, dominating, conquering, being the best. And by being the best, we're taught to be better than everyone else. And then it's no wonder that none of these things ever bring anyone lasting happiness. If you watch interviews with some of the wealthiest, most successful people in the world, they'll tell you that the things that they value most in life are the things that cost little to nothing. Because these things that cost little to nothing are just peaceful moments of being present, whether it's with loved ones, whether it's by yourself, in nature, whether it's doing something that's creative, something that makes you happy, something that makes you feel like you're just flowing and in the now, in the flow state. That is an indication that you are living from the heart, from the soul, which is just more evidence that we are just wanting to remember our soul self. And that's why I'm saying that the only way to go beyond the ego mind is to understand what it is. Once we understand what it is, we can begin to retract our consciousness, our awareness, our attention from the ego's impulses and bring that energy, that consciousness, and that attention back into the heart where it belongs.